The Autoimmune Connection is a web series dedicated to all things autoimmune, with hosts Christina Findell of A Clean Plate, Emma King of The Bacon Mom, Kate J. of Healing Family Eats, and Rory Linehan of the Paleo PI, interviewing new guests every episode. We're bringing patients, practitioners, friends, and family together to connect the dots between diet, lifestyle, and autoimmune disease.
In Connection. I'm your host, Rory Linehan of the Paleo PI, and on today's show, we're answering your questions directly with one of the paleo community's most respected and well-loved members, Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. We've selected a series of your questions from across Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. A massive thank you to all of the AIP bloggers who helped capture your questions. We'll field a range of your questions on topics including thyroid health, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and food reintroductions. For all of the viewers watching live, we're inviting you to participate in today's show by submitting your questions directly to Sarah. We'll get to as many of these as possible. Now, most of our viewers are going to be very familiar with Sarah, but for those who aren't, Sarah is the creator of the award-winning online resource, thepaleomom.com, co-host of the syndicated top-rated Paleo View podcast, and New York Times best-selling author of The Paleo Approach, or as I like to call it, the Paleo Bible, and the Paleo Approach Cookbook. Sarah earned her doctorate degree in medical biophysics at the age of 26 and spent the next 4 years doing research on critical care medicine, innate immunity, gene therapy, and cell biology, earning a variety of awards for research excellence along the way. Sarah's transition from academic researcher to stay-at-home mum to award-winning, internationally recognized health advocate and educator was driven by her own health journey, which included losing 120 pounds, or 54 kilos for those playing with the metric system, and using both diet and lifestyle to mitigate and reverse a dozen diagnosed health conditions. Her passion for scientific literacy and her talent for distilling concepts into straightforward and accessible explanations form the foundation of her work and her dedication to improving public health. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. That was quite the introduction.
Oh, you have quite the background, and we're really pleased to have you on the show. So to kick it off, we heard a little about your health journey in the introduction there, but could you introduce yourself briefly, your autoimmune diagnoses, and how diet and lifestyle did transform your life?
Yeah, so my journey really got going after my first daughter was born. So that was when I realized that I was still morbidly obese, despite losing 100 pounds in my early 20s and then getting, extremely ill, being put on steroids, gaining it all back, and then really struggling again for years. And so, this realization that, despite having had success at one point, I was no longer successful with weight loss. I was on borderline between prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. I had high blood pressure. I had a collection of skin conditions. Basically, you tick down the list of various skin conditions. I had most of the common ones. And I was low energy. I had asthma and acid reflux and bizarre allergies. I was allergic to cardboard. So if I touched cardboard, I'd get this huge rash. I was allergic to chocolate plus sun. So if I ate chocolate and then went out in the sun, I would get a rash wherever I had sun exposure. Chocolate plus sun. I could have chocolate and stay in a cave and be fine. Or I could go out in the sun with no chocolate and be fine. And so I just had this collection of, very common, health conditions that go with obesity. And then these slightly more unusual, fun ones, just to mix it up. And what happened for me was I wanted to be healthy for my daughter. I wanted to be able to be a good role model for her, really break the cycle of obesity, show her by doing it myself what being healthy is. And so I went on a diet, again, low carb, and lost that 100 pounds that I had already lost once before. And then what happened was the more weight I lost, the less healthy I got. And it took me a long time to realize that's what was actually happening, because I was getting lighter and lighter. So I thought I was getting healthier and healthier, but my skin was getting worse. My energy was getting lower. My acid reflux was worse. My asthma was worse. I was having more issues with depression and anxiety. And the only things that happened that were positive was my blood pressure regulated and my blood sugars regulated. So I got rid of the prediabetes and I got rid of the high blood pressure, but everything else was getting worse. And it was that frustration, by this time my second daughter was born, that really motivated me to search deeper for answers. And it was that search that brought me to the paleo diet. And then the paleo diet that was miraculous, because I went off of 6 prescription medications in 2 weeks and it completely transformed my life. And then I still had to keep digging deeper, which was what brought me to the autoimmune protocol and then everything that I've done since. So really the heart of my journey comes from just wanting to be healthy for my kids. And really that's what continues to motivate me now. And then you steep into that, the part where I'm a geeky scientist and I like the science. And that just infuses itself into everything I do because I can't turn it off.
Well, I love what you said about doing this for your kids. And what really struck me when I opened the Paleo Approach book was on that front page, those words that you put in, you know, I can't remember them exactly, but saying, may my knowledge compensate for my genes, and written to your 2 daughters. And I just thought that was wonderful, and a really good start to an amazing book.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And we love the geek, by the way. Don't ever lose the geek. We were just
talking
a little bit.
It's deeply ingrained. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's dig into these questions. The first one comes from Emma via Facebook, and she asks, you and many others following the autoimmune protocol have since discovered thyroid issues such as Hashimotos. Do you believe that following the AIP is a contributing factor to the disease? Or do you believe that by clearing up your health by following the AIP uncovers the underlying cause of your autoimmune diseases?
So the answer is really neither. So for me, what happened was I was eating the diet part of the autoimmune protocol and not doing any of the lifestyle aspects of the autoimmune protocol. And I think it's something that's really easy for us to do, to radically change the foods on our plate and then ignore stress and ignore sleep and ignore activity and ignore spending time outside, ignore playing and having fun and all of those other things that are really critical for health. And I was not doing any of them. I was doing tons of interviews. I was going on book tours. I was doing a ton of travel. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't feeling well, so I wasn't getting out to CrossFit. I wasn't doing any of it. And at the same time, my journey with the autoimmune protocol was what got me seeing a functional medicine specialist. So I finally had a doctor who could actually do that testing. So when I look at the symptoms that I have with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I started having those symptoms at 7 years old. And I've been able to check off 9 out of 10 symptoms for my entire life since then. And actually twice in my 20s, routine blood tests for thyroid came back with the doctor saying, oh yeah, and your thyroid's a little bit low, we'll watch it. Not, we'll investigate further, we'll try a low dose of thyroid hormone replacement, but yeah, I've been diagnosed with hypothyroidism before, but with no follow-up, no seeing a specialist, you know, nothing that would actually help me. And so it wasn't until a functional medicine specialist, and I was crashing because of all the travel that I was doing and the huge amounts of stress that I was under. And it wasn't until my functional medicine specialist said, let's actually do this full thyroid panel, that we're actually able to see what was going on. So for me, it was kind of both. It was not following the autoimmune protocol, or at least, you know, doing the food part, but I guess also relaxing some of the food part while I was traveling and maybe just being strict paleo, even eating some, you know, rice and some tamari soy sauce and some things that are not considered paleo at all. So it was that part, not actually doing it, ignoring the lifestyle stuff, but then also the part of my journey that brought me to a physician who was actually more savvy for diagnosis. So I think, and I can't prove it, but I think I've had this disease for 30 years. That just roughly gave you my age. We'll just ignore that I just did that. But I think that it's sort of in between those two things, right? It's in between the AIP giving me the ability to get a diagnosis and I don't believe that the AIP creates hypothyroidism. I think it's actually one of the best things you could possibly do for thyroid health. And I think we see in the other, leaders in our community who are getting these same types of diagnoses, it's basically the fact that our health journeys are bringing us to really savvy healthcare professionals that are actually doing testing. And I think most of us, at least, are looking at these diagnoses as, aha, I finally have the answer to the root problem of why I struggled with my weight since forever. And so that, I think, is maybe a hard thing to give as a soundbite, and maybe is being a little bit lost in how we're communicating and sharing our diagnoses. We don't think these are new diseases. We think they've been around for a long time, and we're just finally getting those answers.
Okay, thank you for that. And I really like where you started with that, that, diet isn't the whole piece of this. And it's often really easy to forget that in the community, because it is called the paleo diet. And we often lose that lifestyle, and also call it a mindset factor as well. So, just getting outside, playing, laughing is really important to health. And a way that some people see this is when they go on holiday. You mentioned being more relaxed about your food choices on holiday. I feel some people can actually eat more bigger variety of food when they are traveling or when they are on vacation, because they are relaxing, they're spending the time in the sun, and they're enjoying the company of loved ones.
I think we see that a lot in the community, and I think there's a really so we know that stress directly impacts the gut barrier. And when you are relaxing, you're getting more sleep. We know that the amount of sleep you're getting directly impacts the gut barrier, directly impacts the immune system. When you are on holiday, you are probably changing your hormone environment, your immune system environment, to be more tolerant to suboptimal foods. And that makes sense from a physiological perspective. What was different for me with the traveling was it was not a holiday, right? It was on an airplane every single day, in a new hotel room every single day, and flying all weekend, going, to 3 places on the weekend, then coming home and being like the busy mom and catching up with the blog and everything I had to do over the weekday. So it was more like business travel than holiday travel. So I had the opposite thing, which is I'm traveling, therefore I'm going to relax my food, but my stress isn't lower, and I'm getting less sleep instead of more sleep. So it kind of backfired for me. Whereas I think a lot of other people do find that suddenly, they're stuck someplace and all there is to eat is covered in tomatoes. So they go for it, and hey, it was just fine. But when they eat tomatoes at home, it's horribly inflammatory for them. I intend to someday test out this theory on myself.
Well,
but
that leads
I'm actually taking a vacation, right? Yeah.
Well, that's right. I mean, so being a very ambitious person and having quite a lot on in your life, Sarah, something that's always interested me is that knowing that being so stressed obviously can contribute to poor health outcomes. How do you prioritize stepping back and taking time for your health, going on vacation when you clearly are achieving so much as well? How do you draw that balance, I guess?
So I'm not very good at drawing that balance, and it's something that I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, that's really the answer. Is I don't like the word workaholic, but I'm very ambitious and I'm very focused, and I have a lot of things that I want to accomplish, and it's really hard for me to put that down. What I am very good at is protecting my bedtime, and I am very good at protecting my exercise. And when I do those two things, everything seems to be fine, and I seem to be able to keep going and continue to get healthier. And it's when I start to sacrifice one of those two things, so I start to have a deadline and I got to do something, which means I have to stay up late, or I can't go to CrossFit today even though it's my normal day because I've got to get this thing done. That's when it starts to really undermine my health. So it's the whole, taking, digital detox days, going on holiday. I'm trying. I just went to the beach for the Memorial Long Weekend with my family, and only worked 5 hours a day while I was there. So that's part of the problem is, when your entire everything you do is online and you can take the internet with you wherever you go, it's really, really hard to detach. So, actual holidays, something I would like to try out eventually, but I have not been successful in really even taking a single day off. And that's not something I would recommend anybody do. Like, don't look at me as a role model for how to work too much. I don't think that's not something that I'm doing in a way that I would recommend to anybody. But it is why I've been so successful at the same time. So there's kind of that double-edged sword.
So, I mean, for everyone at home, then I guess it's about finding aspects of the lifestyle part where you can really focus on, and you do find time to put into your daily routine and focusing on them. And then maybe the other parts of lifestyle, getting to them a bit later.
Yeah, I think my daily life has lots of fun moments in it. And what it's missing is those, vacations where it's all about fun. So hopefully I'll be able to figure that out someday.
Well, we'll jump into the next question, and it comes again from Facebook. And I apologize if I've got this name wrong, Leo Schlanger. And Leo asks, I've been strict AIP for 3 months and believe I have candida and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I've been mostly fruit-free, aside from a quarter of a cup of blueberries a day and half a cup of maximum half a cup of starchy vegetables. I take strong antifungals and prescriptive probiotics. Now that I'm cutting high FODMAP foods for SIBO2, as well as raw vegetables, my diet went from manageably strict AIP to extremely limited and repetitive. Do you have any advice for doing all 3 protocols at once?
No, I don't, because I don't recommend doing all 3 protocols at once. So I think that correcting the gut microbiome was already built into the AIP, with the exception of potential fructose malabsorption, so true FODMAP intolerance, but it's not compatible with the Candida diet. So the Candida diet is based on much different ideas about gut health. It's really based on purely starvation of the bad things. It's based on some misnomers about what is even growing in the gut and what feeds them. And the autoimmune protocol is based on 2 things. I think most importantly, it's based on feeding the good guys and letting the good guys then inhibit the growth of the bad guys, because we know that happens. So it's about creating an environment where there's lots of a variety of different types of fibers, a focus on insoluble fiber more than soluble, which is very new research and not actually seen in other diet protocols. Focus on high omega-3 fats. We know that the fats that are in your diet has a huge influence on the type of bacteria that are growing in your gut. And then at the same time, cutting out starches, cutting out these foods that are very, very difficult to digest. We know things like grains and legumes preferentially feed E. coli. We're cutting out alcohol, which preferentially feeds E. coli. So we're cutting out these foods that are known to feed the types of bacteria that we don't want growing in such high numbers. So that corrective influence on gut health is already built in. And so I don't see the AIP as being compatible with Candida. I think you pick one or the other, whichever resonates with you in terms of the rationale behind those diets, and you do one or the other. Because one of the biggest roadblocks that people have to getting better on the AIP is cutting out more and more and more and more and more, to the point where the diet's so restrictive you can't get the nutrition you actually need from it. And it's probably, I would say, like top 3 reasons why I see people don't do better on the AIP, and they're trying to figure out when they're going to feel better. Number 1 is they're not managing their stress. Number 2 is they're not sleeping. And number 3 is they're combining it with other dietary strategies. They're combining it with GAPS, or they're combining it with Candida diet, or they're not doing, they're not doing organ meat, they're not doing seafood. There's got some other reason why they are not getting those nutrient-dense foods. And those nutrient-dense foods are seafood, vegetables until you can't eat any more vegetables on your plate, and organ meats. And know that being the foundation of the diet is really critical to the autoimmune protocol actually working, because part of it is correcting gut bacteria by feeding the good guys, and the other part is flooding the body with nutrients. And it just so happens the same foods do both of those jobs. But that's what the AIP is founded on. It's a very different philosophy, I think, than the Candida diet. So I don't recommend doing them together.
I'm really glad you came out so strongly and said that, Sarah. I mean, my personal experience has been very similar to Leo's. When I first started the AIP, I found that I had an intolerance to sulfur-rich foods. I had an intolerance to foods high in FODMAPs. And so I found myself eliminating these foods from my diet. And I had a very, very narrow range of foods that I could eat. I wasn't focusing on organ meats. Every month or so, I'd have quite a lot of sugar in the form of maybe a coconut ice cream or whatever it would be. And I wasn't healing to the degree that I would like. Probably maybe 3 to 4 months ago, I could see this kind of spiral happening. And I told myself I needed to stop it. And, I worked on a few strategies, which I won't go over here, but that to say, I really focused on the advice that you just gave, making sure that there were lots of vegetables on my plate, lots of variety, making sure that my sugar intake was quite low, including cutting back on fruits, which I believe some people might not be aware of who come to the autoimmune protocol to start with, and then, you know, offal and things like that. And slowly but surely this year, my health has improved, and I like to call it a compound effect. And, you know, it gets a little bit better, and then you improve on that little bit better, and it gets a little bit better. And occasionally you'll have setbacks, you'll have stress or whatever. But if you focus on those pillars of the diet and also the lifestyle factors, I believe that you'll see some healing.
So we know that certainly in some sensitivities, they're actually related to nutrient deficiency. So nutrient deficiency, certain nutrient deficiencies can actually cause certain food sensitivities because you don't have the right cofactors for an enzyme to work or whatever it is in order to handle that compound. So we know that, for example, histamine intolerance can be related to gut dysbiosis and micronutrient deficiencies. We know salicylate intolerance can be related to nutrient deficiencies. And so when you deal with it instead of flooding the body with nutrients, working on digestion, part of working on digestion can be supplements for some people, but for most of us, it's sitting and chewing our food and resting and getting enough sleep and, you know, like just really difficult things with our Western culture, right? We're so used to eating on the run. And Rob Wolf has this great line. It's important to know the difference between your mouth and a vacuum cleaner. And I think about it often because I am like, my nature is to inhale my food. That's like my default setting is to eat it as fast as I can. And I still have to remind myself to sit and chew and take that slowly. But I think that it's really hard to get over that stumbling block of not having the nutrients in order to have something work properly if you're cutting things out. And it's easier to get over that by adding things in. And then what I call it the snowball of good. So it's like you finally get that ball rolling, right? You get your gut health improved enough that you're absorbing the nutrients so that you actually have the nutrients you need to heal, so you can heal your gut even more. And then things finally start falling into place. So it's like a snowball, except it's good things happening rather than how that analogy normally works.
Love that analogy. I'm gonna pocket that one.
Snowball of good. I want it on Instagram. # snowball of good everywhere.
Well, we'll add that to the bio for the next time you're on the show. Creator of the # snowball of good.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so the next question comes from the AIP Yogini via Instagram. And this is a question that I think a lot of people in the community have about food reintroductions. When trying to reintroduce the food, how do you know if you're having a reaction to the food or simply having a flare from something else? I've been struggling with this because I get monthly flares. Although more mild compared to how they were before I started the AAP, I've been hesitant to start my reintroductions because of this. This topic is something that I feel that nobody has fully covered, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that has questions about this. Thank you.
So my standard recommendation is to wait until you're not having flares to start reintroductions. I know that's really challenging because the autoimmune protocol is restrictive. And for some of us, we can kind of get over that mentality, but for others, it's just really challenging. And I don't know that I have any particular great suggestions for how to get to a place where you can embrace those foods other than try to think positive, which is really wishy-washy. So for some people, being able to reintroduce a few foods successfully, especially things like coffee and chocolate and, you know, maybe even egg yolks, right? That opens up such a huge range of comfort foods that we can eat when we can reintroduce just those few things successfully. And so for some people who are really struggling to stick to the autoimmune protocol, I think it's okay to push those reintroductions a little bit sooner in order to get to something that's more sustainable for them. Because there's no point in doing it if you can't stick with it, right? The whole point of making these changes is to improve our health and make it something that's sustainable for the rest of our lives so we can enjoy better health forever, right? So there's this fine line between, like, I'd rather, if someone's having flares, I'd rather they wait to start reintroducing food. So it really is black and white whether or not it's the food. but I understand that need for maybe doing reintroductions a little bit earlier. So, in the paleo approach, I recommend never doing a reintroduction if you haven't slept well, if you've done an unusually hard workout, if you have a cold, if you're feeling unusually stressed, like if there's anything else in your life that has the potential to stimulate the immune system, that's not a good day to do a reintroduction. And the next day is not a good day to do reintroduction. Now, you never know, right? So the reactions can be 4, even 7 days later. So like, I don't know if I'm going to start a reintroduction today if I'm going to have a horribly stressful day tomorrow because I got stuck in traffic. That's really unusual, right? I can't predict that. So you just do the best you can. And if the flares are monthly, I'm assuming that means they're related to the hormone cycle. That means they should be predictable. So then I would pick the 2 weeks that you don't have those flares and only do reintroductions during those 2 weeks. And then the severity of the flare, if it's a predictable cyclic thing, should also be part of the symptoms list that we're considering as we're evaluating whether or not these foods are good. So in an ideal world, we wouldn't be having flares and doing reintroductions. But there's sort of ways to kind of go through it with a little bit more caution, and really focusing on those quality of life foods. I hope they're not chili peppers, because I don't recommend that as an early introduction. Hopefully that's not one of the quality of life foods. But like chocolate, right? Quality of life food. I understand the deep need for chocolate. And then the nutrient dense foods, right? The foods that are actually adding more nutrition, like grass-fed ghee, like egg yolks, from pasture-raised hens. Those foods, there's some really compelling reasons to be including them. And it's unfortunately just the high rate of food sensitivity that has them on the no list in the first place. So those are foods that I think they're quality of life foods, but also they're compelling from a nutrition standpoint to reintroduce. So it's kind of a wishy-washy answer, because it's kind of like, I'd rather you not, but if you are, here you go. But I think that it is a very individual thing, and it really is something that each person needs to evaluate for themselves and find as much objectivity as they possibly can. I know it's really, really tough, because we get so desperate for some old favorite flavor that we want to reintroduce, and we can get in this mindset of ignoring symptoms. And I've done it, right? I thought I successfully reintroduced eggs. They showed up on my food sensitivity panel. I cut them out, and all my acne went away. It was amazing. So I understand that need to try to push them, but it's still important to do as much as we can to sort of hold that in and not push it, because when you push it too much and you do cause a flare, it sends you 3, 4, 5 steps backwards. And that's even more frustrating than going without a food typically.
Definitely. And that's a very good point. And it's healing speeds for people, and being able to reintroduce foods is very individual. Yeah. When I first came to the protocol, I'd seen a lot of people that said, their symptoms had been reversed within the first couple of months. And I set my expectations very high. My expectations weren't met, and that was tough hard. Mentally. Yep, definitely. But what I would have liked to tell myself back in the past was to focus on the healing that had happened, which I think can be very useful and beneficial when moving forward. And just on the food reintroductions, I hope Vanessa doesn't mind, but Vanessa at True North AIP, it took her 3 years to be able to reintroduce certain foods, including egg yolks. But once she reintroduced the start of those foods, she was able to reintroduce a number of other foods all at once. So for some people, it might be gradually, slowly, one food every couple of months. For others, it might be a couple of years, and then they can get into it. But the important thing I think to focus on is the healing that you're doing all the time, and not so much what you're missing out on.
And to pull back to the lifestyle aspect, for me, I successfully reintroduced a bunch of foods. Then I wrote a book, and I had to cut almost all of them back out again. And then I started reintroducing them again. Things got, seemed to be successful. Things got stressful. I had to cut them out again. I reintroduced them again. I got very much into my tunnel vision. And it's taken, for me, I've been AIP for 3.5 years. And it's taken that amount of time for me to really recognize what's working for me, what's not. And what I've hit is a fairly long list of things that I think I'll never be able to eat again. But then, a pretty acceptable list of things that seem to work, at least if they're occasional. right? So that's been also a really important thing for me to learn, is that I've got this list of foods. Tequila is one of them. Yes. But that as long as it's, you know, a couple times a month, I'm fine. If I decided to become a lush and drink every day, I'm pretty sure that wouldn't work out so well for me. So I think that there's this this journey of not just finding the foods that we reintroduce, but also finding foods that are okay once in a while, because that can be a huge like quality of life, you know, positive change as well. Like maybe coffee every day is not going to work, but coffee on Sundays is going to be just fine. So there's a lot of tinkering, and it can be a really long process for people, but it's okay. It's a journey, and we get there, right?
Absolutely. And I've got a tip for you with tequila. I spent my 21st birthday in Belgium, in Brussels, and there was this tequila bar with 500 types of tequila. And the best type that I had was not necessarily sorted tequila, but having cinnamon instead of salt after the shot. So if you're ever doing a shot of tequila, Sarah, give the cinnamon lick instead of the salt.
Cinnamon a go. I will, next time I'm pulling out the tequila, that will be on the to-do list. Yeah.
Great. So we'll answer maybe a question from the live audience. We've got a couple coming in. Speaking of food reintroductions, we'll go to Naomi's question. And she asks, will coming on and off AIP create new reactions? I.e., since I have removed gluten from my diet, if I now have a little bit unknowingly, I will know within 20 minutes. I get very sleepy and can feel crook in the guts. Can this occur with other reintroductions as well? And why is the reaction now much more severe or noticeable than previously? Or is this just my mindset?
It's not, and it's actually the scientific foundation of elimination diets. This is how elimination diets work. So we only have these exaggerated reactions to foods we're actually having a food intolerance reaction to. So that means we're actually producing antibodies against the food. And so what happens is with the immune system is there's like the attacking arm of the immune system, and then there's the regulatory arm of the immune system. So these are the ones that find the bad guys and kill them. And this is the guys that say, hey, everyone, let's just, you know, keep everybody under control and not get carried away and not have like a massive mutiny. And we'll just, you know, everyone calm down. And it's these guys' job to make sure that these guys aren't attacking us, right? They keep everything in check. They turn off the immune system once the job's done. So with a food sensitivity, you've got these guys that are seeing the food as a foreign invader, and they're getting, you know, they're getting all riled up. They want to attack. And then there's these guys, they're very specific. So this guy knows the exact food, the exact protein in the food it's going to react to. And this guy knows this cell, and he's going to stop that cell from getting like way out of control. So what happens when you cut the food out, this guy's got nothing to do. And this guy's got nothing to do. And it just so happens that this guy doesn't live as long as this guy. So the regulatory arm of the immune system dies off faster than the attacking arm of the immune system. These guys are designed to remember that particular cold virus that you had, so that next time you're exposed to that cold virus, your body can fight it off before you ever have symptoms. That's why we only have, you know, one virus once. So these guys hang around longer, and it's different for different people, and it's different for specific cells and the type of antibody that they're producing. They have a half-life of anywhere between 2 days and 10 months, which means it can take years for them to actually completely die off, assuming zero exposure. And anytime there's an exposure, they're going to divide and replicate. So what happens is when you're exposed to that food that you were having a food intolerance reaction to, there's these guys ready to have you know, mount their response and attack. And then these guys aren't here to tell them to be quiet. So that exaggerates the reaction to it. And so that's why when we're having an immune reaction to gluten and you cut it out for a month and then you challenge it, which is, you know, the technical term for tasting a little bit to see what happens. That's why the reaction can be so much stronger. So there's two things to this. One is these guys too will eventually die off. So you can get to a point where your immune system's not going to react. That doesn't mean you can't redevelop an immune reaction if you're talking about a really suboptimal food like gluten. But we can get there where you don't even notice if you're getting exposed. And the other aspect is this only happens with antibody-mediated responses. So it only happens with an intolerance. So if it's a food feeding the wrong kind of bacteria, which is causing some extra gas production and bloating, you know, there's other ways that we can react to foods. If they're generally inflammatory, those tend not to have the big exaggerated reaction. They tend to have the same reaction they always had, or maybe sort of tapering off lower and lower reactions. So if it's a gut dysbiosis issue, as you fix the gut microbiome, those should go away. If it's a, you have a genetic susceptibility to have more inflammation when you have a tomato than other people, which I think happens to me, then that's going to hang around, but it's never going to be a magnified reaction. So, I think that answered the question. Did I answer the whole question?
Yeah, you answered the whole question and more. I had notes. Okay. I was like, I'm going to ask Sarah this and that, and then you were going through and answering those questions. So I think we can move on to the next question.
That was the geek right there. It came out, science geek. Yeah.
We welcome the geek. Valerie from Facebook asks, my functional doctor says she almost never sees fibro patients without thyroid dysfunction, but my tests have always come back normal. I also have Sjogren's and celiac. What test finally shows your Hashimoto's?
So I think there's two things that I want. First, I'll directly answer the question about Hashimoto's. So the test for Hashimoto's is called a complete thyroid panel. So you're looking at thyroid function, which means you're looking at free T3, free T4, reverse T3, which actually tells you a little bit more about stress and how your body is handling the conversion of T4 to T3, T4 is your pro-thyroid hormone. It's active, but it's not really active. It gets converted into T3, typically in the liver, like in the digestive tract, not actually in the thyroid. It can be converted in the thyroid, but the bulk of the conversion happens elsewhere. T3 is the active thyroid hormone. So it's way more active than T4, and it's responsible for most of the metabolic regulation and sex hormone regulation of all of the other things that thyroid hormones do. They pretty much touch everything. They regulate the immune system. They're like awesome. Reverse T3 is inactive. So if T4 is getting converted into reverse T3, that's usually a problem with stress. And then thyroid stimulating hormones, actually not produced by the thyroid at all. It's produced by the pituitary gland. But it actually tells you how well T4 and T3 are signaling back. So like all endocrine systems, the hypothalamus tells the pituitary gland what to do, and then the pituitary gland sends out a bunch of hormones that tell all the other endocrine glands what to do. So it sends thyroid stimulating hormone to the thyroid, which goes, aha, okay, I'm supposed to be turned on. Then if T4 and T3 aren't being produced, those signal back to the pituitary gland that the thyroid got the signal. So if they're not being produced, then the pituitary gland starts making more and more and more thyroid stimulating hormone until the system's just completely broken. So you look at that, because that'll tell you if you've got the thyroid's not working, the pituitary gland's going to go into overdrive. And then the definitive test, or at least one of them from the blood test perspective for hypothyroidism, for Hashimoto's, is antibodies against thyroid hormones. So those are antibodies against thyroid globulin and thyroid peroxidase. Thyroid peroxidase is often abbreviated TPO. So that's the blood test. So it's a blood test. They do everything. That's what's called a full thyroid panel. That was how my Hashimoto's thyroiditis was just diagnosed. Antibodies against TPO are far more common than antibodies against thyroglobulin. And then how high your antibodies are will tell you if you are Th1 versus Th2 dominant, even though that's a very oversimplification of the immune system, but it can be very instructive in terms of some of the things for regulating the immune system. Okay, so that's the blood test. Then the next thing you can have is an ultrasound of the thyroid, looking for nodules and swelling. So a swollen thyroid, this is what we call like a goiter. Swollen thyroid can be an indicator of a bunch of different things that happen that go wrong with the thyroid. Nodules are either from Hashimoto's or from cancer, and how they look on an ultrasound, there's sort of like the obvious cancer, which is like 5% or something. Then there's the obvious Hashimoto's, and then there's the in-between where they'll want to biopsy and really see what's going on. So you can have normal blood tests and have the ultrasound and find things on the ultrasound. So if the blood tests are normal, the ultrasound is the next way to go. So the other thing I wanted to say about that question, though, is fibro is typically secondary to autoimmune disease, but it's not always thyroid. So it could be that in this case, it's secondary to celiac and Sjogren's. So it's not necessarily that thyroid is what's going on there. But also Subclinical thyroid is really common with all autoimmune diseases, just because when the body's inflamed, the thyroid's not happy. So that's another, like, it's definitely worthwhile pursuing. Like, I wouldn't just go, oh, must be secondary to what I already have diagnosed. It's definitely worth going into more detail.
Just a couple of things on that too. On the Paleo View, you, Stacey, and Mickey Trescott talk about this in quite a degree of detail.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe 5 or 6 episodes back, maybe a little bit more. But
it would have been earlier in the year, February maybe.
Okay, yeah. There you go. Yeah, when it was still warm here. I woke up to -4 this morning. Anyway, that's another story.
Celsius?
Yeah, -4 Celsius.
That's chilly.
Yeah, wait, so cool. I'm in Australia. It's not meant to happen.
I didn't know it got that cold in Australia in the winter.
In some parts, it's like this myth that Australia's always warm. But it is a great, anyway.
I know you have seasons. I'm Canadian, so I understand a little bit more. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
we're Commonwealth countries. We're supposed to understand each other. This is all I'm saying.
Basically, the further south you go in Australia, the colder it gets. So up north, you're pretty much always summer. Down south, it's cold.
Are there penguins?
Yes, there are penguins.
So I was just, right? Because you're close to the South Pole.
Well, it's funny because I lived in Montreal for 2 years, and I was like, oh, there's not going to be a summer here. It gets up to like 35 Celsius.
Oh, it's hot and it's humid and it's miserable. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can have the best of both worlds, even in Canada and Australia.
It's true. Canada is not a frozen wasteland. Yeah. And Australia is clearly not a desert where you surf. Right.
Exactly. I'm glad we cleared that up, because I'm sure a lot of our viewers were asking.
A lot of people were like, why aren't they answering the question about the Australian weather? That was the most important thing. Yeah.
And so one of the questions that came to my mind after you were answering the question on thyroid is working with a good doctor. You mentioned earlier that, getting on the AIP led you to working with a good doctor. How does someone go about finding a good doctor in the first place? What constitutes a good doctor, and where can they start?
So what I would look for first is a doctor who understands what functional medicine is, or integrative medicine, because those are doctors who are specifically seeking out additional training that helps them look at root causes. So they're really looking at nutrition, they're really looking at lifestyle, they're really looking at nutrient deficiency, gut health, leaky gut. These are all words that these types of practitioners know, and you can find them in an MD. Functional medicine you can also find in other professionals. You can find them as naturopaths, you can find them as chiropractors. So what that typically means, integrative medicine is sort of a new branch of medicine that I think in the next 10 years is going to really explode. Functional medicine is more like somebody who's a healthcare professional who's taken these extra courses to educate themselves into this branch of medicine, which is really focused on root cause. So looking for somebody who a healthcare professional that self-identifies with those words is very, very helpful. Looking for somebody who knows what the paleo diet is can be really, really helpful, because it means you're going to be on the same page, right? If you're using the autoimmune protocol, you want a doctor who actually can speak your language. So there's a few different, certainly in America and Canada, I don't know how well this is in Europe or in Australia, New Zealand, but there's some online networks that can be really, really helpful for just seeing who's close to you. Now, a lot of these doctors can work with you long distance, so that's really important to keep in mind. So there's primaldocs.com, there's paleophysiciansnetwork.com, and then the Institute for Functional Medicine has a registry of accredited physicians on their website as well. So those are 3 really, really great places to start. I, peddling myself now, also have a consulting company called the Paleo Mom Consulting, and we have that ability on our team. So, it's always nice to find somebody local, but if you can't, the paleomomconsulting.com, and we can work with anyone in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to give a plug for the Paleo Mom Consulting as well. You have some really, really good specialists and practitioners on there. So it's a very good place for people to start. And just to say, again, to reiterate what you said about working internationally, I am based out of Australia, obviously. There are a lot of good doctors here, but I've also worked with doctors out of the States and in Canada, so it can be done. And it is easier than you think.
The time zone's annoying, but as we are proving right now, we can find normal times where we're both awake where we can talk.
Exactly. So we'll get to one last question, and then we'll wrap up the show. It comes from Jane B, and she's submitted it live. She says, I'm suspecting a salicylate reaction, possibly from coconut or turmeric. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I'm following AIP. I'm on day 18 of my AIP and flaring badly. Very sore joints and severe skin reactions. Worse than ever before. Would love any advice. Thanks.
So salicylate reactions can be related to zinc deficiency, I believe. So zinc-rich foods is definitely a good place to start. If the reactions are that bad, I would do a short-term low salicylate diet and see if that will help you determine if that's really it. So there's this idea in the alternative health community that we can have these, they're called die-off reactions. We can have things like rashes and diarrhea and just feeling really crummy and headaches because our bodies are detoxing. And that, certainly some of those things make a lot of sense just for a rapid change in the gut microbiome. There's no evidence that that can actually be caused by diet changes. So it's a very controversial idea. And I personally feel like a rash, especially if it's increasing, is not something to wait through and not something to go, oh, it's a die-off reaction, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I would be looking at cutting out the foods that you think are the culprits, at least temporarily, working on that nutrient density. And this would be a really good time for some digestive support supplements, because if you're having these types of reactions, that's usually a really strong indicator of very bad gut health. So that's where something like L-glutamine to help with the gut barrier function, something like digestive support supplements, something like, digestive support supplements that hit everything. So hit the pancreatic enzymes and gallbladder function with ox bile. Always talk to a doctor before doing anything with hydrochloric acid in it, because it's contraindicated in many situations. Actually, always talk to a doctor or healthcare professional or whoever's guiding your journey about any kind of supplements, because they're going to understand your history in much, much more detail than I can from a question. Plus, I'm not a doctor and can't actually give you medical advice. But those things can be really helpful for increasing absorption of nutrients to get that snowball of good happening again. Really, really work on sleep, really, really work on stress management. So if you think it's a salicylate reaction, like for right now, cut those foods out. And then if it goes away, then you can start adding them back slowly and gradually later. There's tons and tons of great vegetables that are low salicylate vegetables. So it's not going to be limiting in variety. You're gonna have to be a little bit more you're a little bit more imaginative and to seek out that variety, but it's there. So so that's, I think that would be the starting place. And then if it's continuing, find, actually right now, find a good practitioner to work with, because when you're having those really adverse reactions to changes in diet, that's when you want somebody who knows a lot, who's on your side, who can really look at food journals, look at your reactions and really help you tease that apart. Because there's, supplements that can help, depending on exactly what's going on. There's medications that might be helpful, right? There's conventional medicine and alternative medicine that can work together to really make this an awesome health journey. So finding somebody who can help you navigate that will be really helpful.
Absolutely. And I liked how you touched on food journals at the end there. I think that's a great place for people to start when they get to the autoimmune protocol, just journaling what they're eating each day and noting down any reactions that they might have too. There are
especially with reactions, it's definitely a minority of very small minority of people who follow the AIP who will have these sort of exaggerated reactions to something. But it's sometimes a food that you're eating more of that you actually have a food allergy or a food intolerance to, and that's just extra that you get to have, which is awful, but it's, it happens. I am intolerant to nutmeg. and mace, just because that's random. So that's sad for me. Mace is really good in sausage. So
I can't have coconut butter. It kills me inside. It hurts so bad.
So I can only do coconut milk and coconut oil. I can't eat any other coconut products. They make me look 9 months pregnant within about 20 minutes of eating them, and very uncomfortable. It's pretty awful. So finding those extra food intolerances is really, really helpful. And so if you're having any kind of like, you know, oh, some mornings I wake up with a headache, pulling out the food journal, because it's not always what you ate the day before, but sometimes it's what you ate 3 days before or 4 days before. And the only way to see those patterns is to have that really extensive list of when I had the symptom, when I ate what food.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think we'll call it a show there. It was a blast having you on the show, Sarah. I had a lot of fun. I want to thank you for coming on and answering the questions of the community so comprehensively. So thank you. And before you do go, could you tell the viewers where they can find you?
Everything I do, you can find me off thepaleomom.com. So you can link to my podcast, my books. What else do I do? All my social media sites, all the cool extra products that I'm working on, everything you can find from thepaleomom.com. And from there, it's just, right, it's the door. It's the door to the Paleo Mom world. But that's the best place to go to find me.
Great. And we'll put that in the comment section below once this gets to YouTube, thepaleomom.com. It's very simple. Now, for all of our viewers, be sure to share your thoughts in the comment section below once this does get to YouTube. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed the discussion, and subscribe to the channel. Love it, Sarah.
So I have to actually say something, so it'll switch to my feed here, right? So thumbs up. Yay.
And yeah, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more of the Autoimmune Connection. We'll be back next week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. And we're done.